Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to our webinar workshop almost on ROI and quality using data to build real value. My name is David Isaacson. I'm Vice President of Product Marketing for ETQ, and I'm joined by Jennifer Bianchini, who is on the product marketing team as well. And we'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. And before we get started, just want to do real quick housekeeping here. The logistics for the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar widget on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the questions area and type in your question. Also, we will be recording today's session and we'll send that out to everybody. Today's webinar is a little bit different than other webinars we've done in the past. We're really going to start to dive into the values that support an ROI for quality management. So we'll do a real quick overview of ROI, how to strategically approach that quality ROI, and then talk about data and the specifics data and what types of data that we see based upon lots of interactions with customers, interviews we've done, third-party research that we've done that drives the ROI, and figure out how to help you optimize ROI for a specific quality project that you might have coming up. And that helps in terms of justifying the funding that you're going to get for a project, and help, when you are asking for money and there are other parts of your organization also asking for money, it helps the teams that make the final decisions figure out the best sources and best places to allocate funds, which are always a limited resource for an organization. A couple things. One thing we will not get into today is pricing. That's going to be unique to every single organization. So the final ROI that you come up with for whatever project you're looking at will be based upon the investment that you're making as an organization. The other thing to recognize, and I'll repeat this later, is that each ROI is going to be unique to your organization. It is not something that's a cookie cutter kind of an approach. This really is tailored to the projects, to the investments that you're looking to make in quality going forward, and where you're going to be able to see significant improvements either in costs or revenue or productivity, streamlining operations, things like that. We'll get into all those details in a couple of minutes. So this is the agenda that we talked about here. So we're going to start with just a quick overview, like understanding your business's key metrics with regard to quality. That's really what today's task is for us. That's what we hope to achieve with you as we go through the next hour or so. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. We will monitor the Q&A area. That way, any questions that you might have will be more relevant to the area that we're discussing. We won't wait till the very end to answer all the questions if we can get to them. And the results will be the ability to create an ROI model. And that is where, working with your ETQ account executive, you'll be able to take the data that has been identified and really understand what the return on investment will be across a number of different dimensions. And the reason we really have been pushing on ROI, this is something that we've been passionate about, helping businesses over the last 3, 4, 5 years understand, is because as quality professionals, we talk about these items that you see on the screen, right? We always talk about continuous improvement, FSMA, APQP, FMEA, PPAPs, SPC, nonconformances, all these terms that are very focused on quality. What we don't do a lot of times, and this is, I've seen this with many organizations over the last few years, is we don't talk in business terms. So we don't think about profit or margins or expenses. However, there are several areas that we do get into that boundary and crossover. Start to talk about warranties, recalls, scrap and waste, inventory, because those items have a real impact on the organization. So we can go from talking about those terms that are important to quality to talking about the terms that are important to business, because these items start to drive results when it comes to increased revenue, reduced expenses, improved margins. And when you look at, especially in a public company, annual reports, these are the values that become very public and very visible. And so we as quality professionals have a real impact on our company's position in the market, not just for the products that we sell and the customers that we have, but also the financial markets. So that becomes really important. Very basic. We want to just talk about, how do we drive towards that profit? How do we drive towards an improved return on investment? And one thing that we always have been talking about is that quality isn't just about saving money. I mean, that's the first thing everybody thinks about is how do I reduce costs? But it can also help improve revenues. What happens if you can bring a product to market faster? You generate revenue. What happens if you have happier customers, better reviews on review sites, customers who are willing to stand up and say how great your product is? That can help drive additional revenue. So those are really interesting and critical points to think about. The other is we are obviously in some economic uncertain times, and how do we make sure we keep investing in quality during these times? And so being able to justify that investment becomes even more important. Many times a quality investment easily pays for itself, and that's what we want to help you understand and drive to. So we want to keep this conversation moving forward. There are certain areas that we want to focus on. And I think, hold on 1 second here, I will turn it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit more about what we're doing here.
Thanks, David, for the guidance on bridging the gap from quality to the business. So another thing that you will want to keep in mind, and to help keep the conversation going within your organization, especially for those who are going to be approving the funding for expanding your QMS, you will need to position the conversation with language that is in their area of their focus. So we'll go through a couple examples here. So your primary focus may involve reducing the cost of poor quality, such as scrap, rework, and complaints. But when discussing this with the folks who will approve the funding, consider language such as improving the quality and profitability of your products, which is a little bit more relatable to them. For streamlining operations, consider language such as tackling manual processes that take a long time and can undermine the decision-making process to address the lack of consistent document management. When looking at reducing the risk of non-conformance, while you may be focused on decreasing audit findings, consider language around ensuring the organization is demonstrating compliance to all regulatory frameworks and customer requirements. And finally, for driving and protecting revenue, speak to goals that are oriented to delivering products on time and budget, or increasing the speed of innovation and new product introductions for when you want to address non-conformances and product failures. So now we'd like to pivot to the approach we're taking today. And as David mentioned, it's a little bit different. We're going to take a deep dive into the information that you'll need, where you can find it, and how to use it to build the ROI. This information will help you with your conversations with stakeholders and those who are going to approve the funding for the project. And this will provide you with the data that you will need to make the business case. And then I think if we could just go one more. Great, thanks. So before we kick things off, we'd like to make you aware that if you don't have all of the data to build your ROI, that is okay. We have provided benchmarks to help you start the process. The benchmarks were created from interviewing 12 ETQ customers from discrete to process manufacturing, And the company size is varied as well, from enterprise to mid-market, so creating a well-rounded sample set. And then if we move to the next one, thanks. But there is one area in which benchmarks are not available, and this will need to be your unique information, which you see displayed here. Again, if you don't have all of the data points, that's okay. You can skip that line item or give it your best guesstimate, and you can always go back to it and refine it later. And now I'll turn the next part over to David.
All right, thanks, thanks, Jennifer. And we're just going to hang on this slide for 1 minute, just to make sure that everybody understands the data that we're looking at here. And I don't think, Jennifer, we have another slide on the inputs on this one, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's just talk about this slide for just a moment. So what we're showing you are key variables that really help define what the ROI for a specific project can be. As Jennifer said, not all the data that we're going to show you is necessarily required for generating an ROI. It's really going to be tailored to your specific needs. But there's some really key things in here that when we think about reducing the risk of noncompliance or streamlining operations or reducing the cost of waste and scrap and so forth, or driving revenues, that we just want to make sure that we understand certain items. So on this slide, when we think about compliance, a lot of that comes from audits. And so we want to understand how many auditors are out there doing audits, how much time they take per audit, and we'll talk about in a moment as well. How many people are working on doc control. I mean, that is a core function of quality management. So a lot of organizations are focused on that these days. How many customer complaints do you get a month? Because you need to react to those, or you may need to take action based upon those, and those could lead into corrective actions and nonconformances that need action as well, and that's why they're also on this. And then when you think about supply chain, if you're looking at supplier quality, how many deliveries do you get every month from suppliers that you need to look at, maybe do inspections and so forth. So these are the types of data points that help set us up for understanding the ROI of any particular project. And then when we start to drill into the specific areas, these are the points. So the data that you're seeing here came from the work that we did with a third-party company, where they went out, as Jennifer said, interviewed a number of ETQ customers to understand the value that they actually got from ETQ Reliance. So based upon that, we've brought that data into a model that helps us and helps you come up with what the ROI of a particular project would be. You see the benchmarks there. This is an average, a conservative average typically, of what all of these different customers saw. So for example, when we think about reducing noncompliance, the risk of noncompliance, there were a number of inputs that came out of the study. One is how much time is spent scheduling, planning, and reporting audits each month. And that was 6 days per month is what the benchmark said. Again, as we go through here, your numbers may be higher or lower, or you may not worry about audits. Not a problem. We can still work with you to come up with what the ROI is for your project. The other thing to understand is if you're not sure, we can always start with the benchmark and then tweak it as we go. One thing about a model like we're showing you is that there's a lot of flexibility to make sure that it reflects reality of your organization. Another area is the number of audits conducted per year per auditor. So this is now on an annual basis, right? And could be higher, could be lower, but want to understand how many audits. We actually went with a conservative number in the model. Our customers were anywhere between 30 and 45 per year and those that were interviewed. How much time does each audit take, especially supporting external audits? It's not just the internal audits that you have to deal with, when you audit yourselves, but when regulatory agencies or customers come in to audit you. I know that as an organization, ETQ gets audited by its customers on a regular basis. And so we know how many hours per audit it takes to work on these different activities. Then how many audits do you support? per, internal audits. Now, so that would be external, this would be internal audits. How many people do you have supporting those external audits? And then once you have an audit finding, whether it comes in as a finding and it doesn't get formalized, or it becomes a corrective action in the QMS, what's the average cost of remediating? We have found that customers ranged anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000. We used $5,000 to be conservative. If you're a life sciences organization and you're regulated by the FDA, that number tends to be a little bit higher, but at least we have an average cost, because there is a real cost to addressing audits. And then the number of findings per audit was anywhere between 7 and 12 on average. So when we think of non-compliance, that's the first section that we look at in terms of the results. Jennifer?
Thanks. So now we're going to take a look at entering the information that will help your organization to streamline operations. So that's the time that can be spent on managing a non-conformance or incoming supplier deliveries. So first, what we're looking at is the average amount of hours spent on document control per week per person. And again, if you don't have this information, that's okay. You can see we have a benchmark provided here. This number, again, based off of our sample of ETQ customers, and they estimated around 10 to 15 hours a week. So the benchmark here reflects the more conservative number. If we move on to the next line item, that's the average amount of hours your teams are managing non-conforming material instances. So we've learned from our customers that they spend 1 to 3 hours a week. And if you aren't sure, you can utilize the benchmark, which is 2, and that's the middle ground of the information that they've provided us. And then if we move to the next line item, which is the average amount of hours, say your help desk or your customer service teams spend managing customer complaints. You'll note we have a conservative number of 5 here provided for the benchmark that you can utilize as well if you're unsure. And if we go to the next, we're looking at supplier deliveries. So what is the average amount of hours spent a week on receiving and inspecting deliveries? If you have the information enter here, that's great. If not, we have a conservative number of 5 hours per week provided that you can utilize. And if we go to the last line item, wrapping this up, is corrective action. So what is the average amount of hours your organization spends creating and managing corrective actions? Again, if you're not sure, that's fine. You can use the benchmark number, which is provided, and that's 40 hours a week. And then, David, if you wouldn't mind taking this part.
Sure. Thanks. So as you see, as we're going through this, there are a number of different variables that can help identify what the return on investment is. Before we dive into the reducing costs here, I want to talk a little bit about what some people call hard costs versus soft costs. Typically, what we just went through, what Jennifer and I just reviewed on those first 2 sections, are considered more soft costs because they're people's time, typically, that we're talking about saving. Now, that's not to say we're going to eliminate people. I mean, we don't want to give that impression as that's what we're advocating here, because it's not. What we're talking about is freeing up people from doing drudgery type work and allow them to take on more significant strategic activities for an organization. However, I've worked with a number of customers who also look at those first 2 areas as more hard costs, and one in particular that I'm thinking about had budgeted a significant amount in the following year to hire. So it wasn't current headcount, but it was new headcount they had in the budget for auditors. And based upon what they've seen with ETQ Reliance and the amount of savings from an audit perspective alone, that they've been able to avoid hiring 2 additional auditors. So for them, that became a hard cost savings, that they were able to redirect those budget dollars to other activities. Now, this next section, we talk about reducing costs. This is where we start to see more impact on real hard costs. Right now, we're going to talk about the cost of scrap and rework. We're going to talk about field failure and warranty costs and inventory carrying costs. These three benchmarks that you see here, based upon the interviews that we've done with the customers, have led to some significant understanding of savings. So you might know your actual number for scrap and rework. What we have found is that on an average, it was about 0.5% of revenue. So from a benchmark perspective, we can start with that, but we can also put in the actual numbers. When we look at field failure costs and warranty costs, again, that number was about the same, about 0.5% of revenue. So it can be just use the benchmark or your actual numbers. So a lot of organizations track this today, a lot don't. So the idea is that we can go with either number. And then, as you can tell, same thing for the average inventory carrying costs. In fact, notes 9 and 10 were what were on the previous slides, which were 0.5% of each. So the average inventory carrying costs turned into 1% of total company revenue as a benchmark. Again, your costs may and probably will vary. As I said, this is a very tailored approach to return on investment. And so the more accurate we can become, the more accurate our return will be. And back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you. So now we're getting into the final and fourth area for collecting the data to build your quality ROI. And that's growing, protecting product revenue, reducing the time to market. So the first data point is the estimated revenue for a new product introduction. So the ETQ customers that we worked with provided their estimated NPI equal 30% of revenue growth. But you'll notice the benchmark provided is more on the conservative side at 10%. And again, feel free to utilize that number or enter your own information if you have it. And then the second and last is the average amount of time and months your organization spends developing a new product. So we've learned from our sample ETQ customers, they spend an average of 9 to 12 months. But we provided the benchmark on the lower end of that. And again, you feel free to utilize this information, and if you can skip it, go back to it later and when you have that information. So now we're going to go on to the fun part where David is going to take us through a summary of the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to say about these grow and protect revenue numbers, when we've done the ROI research with a number of customers, and we've applied this to their current situations, what we have found is that we're less likely to look at the grow and protect revenue. A lot of organizations just want to look at the cost saving, and that's fine. And a lot of times that will more than justify the investment in a project around a QMS. Growing and protecting revenue then becomes, an added benefit. But we know that from an ROI perspective, it may be more difficult to justify that additional revenue. So we would want to work with you and understand what's important to your organization, and that's why we're going through the details that we're going through here. That way we can create an ROI that is most relevant for you specifically. So as Jennifer said, we now want to take a look at what happens when we put all this into a big pot and stir it together. What we can do is we can now calculate the ROI. So we had in here a specific investment level, and we looked at a number of different items that went into the savings, and I'll show you some of the details in a moment what's behind this. But we can come up and say, for this particular investment in year one, because that's typically when the largest part of the investment is made, there was a 58% return on investment. For looking at just the cost savings and productivity improvements without the revenue increase, right? So I said, since we know that sometimes revenue is not something that we want to take into account, we break it out. We had 58% for year one, 132% over a 3-year time, and then if we include the revenue increase in there, the ROI gets even better. So you can start to see how this investment will play versus the returns that you get. And there's a bar chart that shows those numbers on a year-over-year basis, what the investment is, what the return is, and therefore why this particular investment might be very valuable to an organization because it's returning a lot more to the organization than is being invested. So as I said, in this case, it's really paying for itself and then some. We can also look at, and you'll see some dollar amounts in here. These are random dollars. These are not based upon any particular customer or investment level, but just a sample of some of the dollars in here and how this would look from a reporting perspective. We break it down by those 4 areas, right? So the reducing the risk of non-compliance, streamlining operations, reducing costs and revenue. And we can show you the impact each area has on the ROI. In this particular sample, the streamlining of operations has the largest impact, followed by the revenue, followed by risk of non-compliance, and finally reducing costs. So we can show you and start to prioritize where you're going to see those improvements from an ROI perspective, whether it's cost or revenue. And then in this case, we graph it out to show you just what that would look like over the first 3 years, and get a feel for being able to present to upper management. So one of the things that we like to do is provide details that you can take to whoever is in charge of approving the funding, then you can vet and leverage that information very effectively. Another area we look at from an executive level, as well as understanding really what's going into the ROI, is rather than just those 4 categories, we break it down even further, right? So we talked about a bunch of these different items, right? We gathered variables for these different items. So for example, document review, right? We talked about doc control, how many people work on doc control, how many hours are spent working on those documents. So if we're able to streamline operations in document management, that's where we're seeing in this particular model the largest savings. So of the ROI, 50% of that ROI comes strictly from doc control. Another 12% come from managing audits more effectively. Right, talked about that. Then the grow revenue, there were a couple of items in there, reducing costs and so forth. So you can see which areas have the most significant impact towards an ROI. And the ones that we've highlighted are just some of the key ones that we see across a lot of different customers. Those are some of the most common improvements seen across our customers in those 3 areas that are highlighted there. In fact, in receiving and inspection, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about suppliers, but receiving and inspections, because the supply chain is so important to an organization's production, that it's really critical that we streamline the supplier operations as much as possible. And then finally, we can put it all together, present a total view. And in addition to the ROI, we also tell you what the payback is. So how fast will this system pay for itself? And in this model, in this particular approach, it is a 6.2 months payback, which you typically want your payback in a SaaS world to be less than a year, because you're doing an investment every year. So in this case, it fits right within that window. And so you can see how that all fits together. Now, one comment about ROI. We have seen, and I've worked with a lot of customers on ROI, seen very high returns on investment. as we kept saying, as Jennifer and I kept saying as we went through here, we were using a conservative approach. We recommend being a bit more conservative, even if you believe or know that you're going to see even higher returns. Going to management, going to the funding authorities to ask for money when you have ROIs in the thousands and tens of thousands of percent, which I've seen on certain projects, that's really difficult. Now, after the fact, if you want to go back and measure the ROI, you might find that you had a 5,000% return on investment. And we have customers who tell us that all the time. We have a lot of case studies where the return has been significant. But our approach is to take a conservative first step to make sure that the ROI is believable, it's supportable, and that it's something that once you agree to it, you'll be able to live with it. Because we've also seen a lot of times where that ROI number becomes something that our customers and our contacts at these organizations, they start to get measured on it. So not to scare anybody off, but it is something that becomes really important to an organization and can become really important to you as you move forward with this type of with new projects. So the last thing we want to really cover is, okay, here's all this data that we've talked about. Maybe you have access to it. Maybe you have it, in a spreadsheet or set of spreadsheets. Maybe you don't. So we want to help make sure that you understand where to find the data and who might be able to help you fill in the blanks here. So Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks, David. So when you're working on building your ROI, as David said, we recommend that you utilize the departments within your organization who have this information that can help you. Work with the stakeholders on the finance teams or the auditors and understand their processes. If there's a line item in the ROI calculator that doesn't apply to your organization, you can still build it out. Just remember, keep this in mind. This is one of the many tools that you will have available to you to help fund your ETQ QMS initiative. And I don't know, David, if there's anything else that you wanted to add to this slide.
Nope, I think you've covered it. You might actually, I take that back. We might also want to go to IT. They might be able to help you identify where the data might live, depending on how your organization is structured. So that might be another team that you can leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, if advancing to the next slide, we're here to help you out also. So your ETQ representative can provide you with the guidance you may need to build a quality ROI and the language that your business leaders and those who will approve the funding for your project will understand. They will help you put that picture together, highlighted in dollars and cents, and the payback that your organization will receive with ETQ Reliance. So I believe next, just a quick time check, because we've now come to the point in the webinar where we're going to do Q&A, and we have plenty of time. And if anyone has any questions, I don't see anything in the chat yet.
And that's okay. If in fact, because ROI is very personal to every organization, you would prefer to take questions offline and ask individually, your account executives are certainly available and have access to us for following up with questions. I know that I believe I've received at least one question in email that we will handle offline per the request of the individual who asked the question. So happy to take questions now. If not, we can give you some time back for the rest of the hour, and we will hopefully be following up with everybody. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Give a moment just to see if any questions come in, but I think we're good. Jennifer, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It was I think this approach will help a lot of organizations as they look to new projects.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.